Welcome everyone to the Surfliner Winter 2026 Sprint 1 review. We've got a lot of good updates to share with you today, and what we're going to do is kind of roll through and kind of ground the sprint review and what the accomplishments were, how that relates to our work cycle, some process changes that we've been outlining to actually increase our delivery, and then kind of outline what the milestones are, and then actually get into some accomplishments, which you're going to hear from the team, which I'm very excited that you're going to be able to do. So what were the goals of our sprint here? And really, our sprint was in two large parts, very focused on discovery integration. So really delivering that connected system that would sort of include all the bits to make publishing happen to a discovery platform, and talking about advancing the discovery platform to be able to show that working. And also unblocking data migration for production needs. Those are the two big call outs. And one thing that is different about how we started this work cycle, we actually took an extra week up front and very intentionally stepped through all of the various bits. We're getting into some pretty complicated areas of code bases and process, and we wanted to give the team enough time to really look ahead as we implement, to make sure that we aren't encountering a lot of unknowns and unexpected wrinkles along the way, which in software development there are plenty even for that. So I think what a couple things to call out there. I think what you're going to hear today was accomplished in 2 weeks, not 3. This is actually pretty decent for the bunch that we're going to share with you. And also, I think the balance that we're trying to achieve with shipping really high quality code and allowing that same code to be reviewed, it creates an interesting flow situation where we're trying to slow down and be deliberate and not introducing regressions. And I think the team did a fantastic job balancing that. So let's talk a little bit about what we were trying to support during this sprint. So really, a couple of themes here. We have our discovery integration, that's publishing from Comet to ADRL8, or our discovery prototype. We're preparing for the UCSD discovery development and deployment side. We're doing some discovery development itself, which is moving requirements for complex objects, collections, and sub-collections forward, and also doing a lot of that forward look ahead to understand how that API behavior is going to inform that first one. We did a lot of unblocking for data migration. We're going to hear from both our Comet and Shoreline teams. Those are finally some really key decisions, like making sure we have validated metadata export, etc. So what's going in, so what's coming out in the right ways, and some updates from the Shoreline team too. And most really important, we also are finalizing our disaster recovery, really specifically for the Comet database restorations, and also sorting out some metadata requirements for sending to EasyID. So that's the top level view. I'm going to invite in our team to talk a little bit more about the accomplishment side of this. And to start us off for that, I'd like to turn it over to David and Margaret for discovery integration.
Hey, folks. So, as you may or may not know, Comet is a staff-facing platform. So we need to publish content from Comet to discovery platforms for patrons to actually be able to see it. And this is something that we've had working for quite a while for Shoreline, for geospatial data, and also for Tidewater, which is our OAI PMH implementation. But for ADRL Lite, first of all, we have an all new application that needs to be able to receive or harvest that content, and it's needs a richer set of metadata and kind of a custom metadata schema to support all the needs of discovery compared to the lighter weight stuff that you need for OAI PMH, or the very geospatial specific metadata that we had for Shoreline. So we're kind of working at this from both ends. Mostly, I was doing a bunch of work on the ADRL Lite side to be able to receive publish events from Comet, and then query the SuperSkunk metadata service to get the metadata for the published objects. And then Margaret was doing a bunch of work on the SuperSkunk side to be able to provide that metadata. Margaret, I don't know if you want to talk about any of that in any more detail.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say we've been kind of tag teaming it, I think, with David Moles doing the how do we get with me doing the how do we get the metadata out of Comet, and David Moles doing how do we get the metadata into the discovery platform once it's out of there. And I think that we've had some really fruitful discussions about how to do that. And I appreciate that it's two of us working on this as opposed to one person having to tackle it all themselves. And like they said, I think that in the past when we've done this, we've had like a very clear and defined schema in terms of what we want that to look like. With OAI, it's Dublin Core. And with geospatial stuff, we have Aardvark. So it's just been kind of like following what those standards specify. But with our own discovery platform, we don't really have any of that. So we've had to imagine for ourselves what we want that to look like and how we want to structure it. And then on the other end, also had these conversations between, I think, mostly David Moles and Elisa in terms of like, okay, now when we're putting this in the front end, how are we presenting it in that sense? So there's been a lot more like architectural and how do we want the metadata to be structured and like those sorts of considerations that we're trying to do a good job of upfront to make sure that that's done and managed in a sustainable way. Lots of those conversations. Some of the things I think over the past sprint have solidified pretty well. Some of them are still kind of open questions that we're hoping to resolve in the next sprint. I guess that's where I'd say the state of things is, but I think it's been fruitful and we've had good discussions.
Yeah, it's really been great. The other piece on this theme is, of course, we've been talking about ADRL Lite, which is uh, Santa Barbara's interim discovery solution. But of course, San Diego also needs that. And I think when we originally started this, the ADRL Lite idea, maybe a year ago, I think we had the idea that the timing would work out such that we could build something for Santa Barbara and then build something for San Diego. And it's increasingly clear that doesn't really work, and we need to be working on both at once. And of course, David Trujillo especially has done at least some initial work on developing components and a placeholder homepage for UCSD and so on. But we hadn't tackled the question of how are we actually going to facilitate deploying two applications and how are we going to share what code between those. And so we had some really good discussions this sprint, and I think where we ended up is that with the micro front end architecture, um, at least for now, as long as the like the search API behavior and how the faceting works, the faceting logic works, and that kind of thing is the same for both campuses. We really can develop one application, but then build campus specific, have that ship with campus specific front ends. So we can have a UCSD homepage, an arrangement of components, and some specific UCSD behavior, and we can have the Santa Barbara one that we've already been working on that's following along with ADRL. So there's still some future work to do to get to the point where we could actually deploy these things and to iron out some of the wrinkles about how we configure um, which version of the front end you're seeing. But I think it's really promising, and a few sprints down the line, it's really gonna unblock the UCSD interim discovery development. So I think that's really great.
Thanks, David. I appreciate you kind of unpacking that last point. That one's it's been a real interesting one for us to kind of look at, and also I think everyone's looking forward to I think a moment where we're all finally dialed in there. That's awesome. All right, I think let's turn this over to the discovery development side with Elisa and David T.
Hello. So I'm going to share my screen and show you some of the work that we've done in this first sprint. So you should see a ADR Lite search results page. Can I have a nod that you are seeing it? Awesome. Thank you. Okay, so what we've done this go is to help improve usability. So we were working on identifying some ways that we could do that. One of the ones that we found is we were only allowing for a search query to happen or a facet search to happen. Um, or you could do a query and then a facet, but you couldn't do it the other way. And so in this go, what we've done is we can do both ways. So I can come in here and I can select a facet, and then I can also add a query. Um, and I can go the other way, which wasn't possible before. You would come in and you could do a search query. Let's do band. And then we can go to contributor again, and break that down. And so now it can go seamlessly both ways, adding to that usability and I think intuitive use of a search program. Like there won't be a hindrance. The other thing too that was worked on was a bread, breadcrumb navigation. And so with this, has been a really great part of some of our exploration of the API. It starts to lead us down into a collection page and what that looks like. And so now we're able to go backwards and forwards, which is currently functionality in our current ADRL that we want to mimic here. And so that got developed as well. And then we have our metadata still down here as it was before. And yes, these are two major features that we were able to improve on. And we have some others underway. Like I was saying, now that we kind of unlocked this page for a collection view, I'm getting to go deeper into what that means and what we can display here for collections. And that's been really fun. So up next, we're going to have David Trujillo talk about some of that API exploration that was done.
Yeah, hi, this is David Trujillo. I can talk a little about some of the API exploration that we did for this sprint, and it kind of touches on like, one of the things Elisa just mentioned was like one of the collection page, right? I was kind of trying to look at this API data to kind of get an idea of like, what can we do with this? What can we get out of it? And like what pieces are there, what pieces are missing. I just had like a lot of big questions. And working with it, yeah, we were able to get the beginnings of a collection page. We found all the little pieces that we needed and made notes of the things that perhaps we could use and set those aside for a talk that we had. We were able to build out a richer object page that displayed a list of, components or members for more complex objects and get that pager to work in a more, traditional way as opposed to like our first stab at the object page, just kind of just like just a page full of data. Now we had something you can click through and view the various different parts of different components of an object. Um, I was also able to kind of make some more choices with respect to like, questions we had about, which document object model to go with, light versus shadow, and kind of test some fetching approaches, testing some ideas I had about like, should we keep these file calls to a minimum or should we like, try many? And, um, sorry, I'm kind of going through a lot of notes here. Um, Also found a way to improve the way we were displaying our metadata. So now we have like a richer metadata set. Hasn't really been integrated into the repo yet, but the exploration work has the beginnings of all of that. And yeah, it also allowed us to like, basically look at the data, look at different things, different member lists, ask the tech leads, which ones we should be using and make those types of determinations so that the next steps forward or like help us produce something that will actually, be the code that we use to display like the components and object pages. And yeah. Also, there was like some side discoveries too, like with respect to like, okay, we built out like a collection page, that's cool. But then it also helped us kind of like, look at the results page and figure out what bits and pieces we need to add to that to get like, collections to like be listed there. Looking at data from what I thought was a cool little discovery was like, how does file set data play into all of this, right? And how are we going to render that? It was kind of a question I had. And playing with the API now showed us that like for the most part, all that information will be delivered by the manifests and consumed by, things like the universal viewer to display this information in the future for like, stuff like, zip archives, text files, Excel files, those types of things, the manifests or whatever will just, like the API will provide download links. And so that was a cool bit of information to uncover. And then yeah, basically, yeah, what it was is cool exploration that allowed us to ask a lot of good questions and get answers from the tech leads and provide us with a cool path forward. So, I mean, that's basically all I got. If you let me go, I'll keep rambling. I don't think anybody wants it. Thanks.
Thanks for the discovery development team. Those are some great updates there. All right, so let's transition over to a little bit more Comet-centric side of the house with a little twist of Shoreline for unblocking data migration with David and Gabriella.
Gabriella, do you want to talk maybe about the visibility options and the file use stuff, and then I can talk about the more technical side?
Yeah, I could briefly tell our viewers that previously we were lacking two important visibilities that have been implemented in this sprint. Number one, suppressed discovery, that would be like collections for UCSD. I believe it's open topography where you can access the content if you have the link, but you cannot do a solar search in the system itself. So it's external. And then we also have, remind me what the other one is, suppressed discovery and what was the other
Click
one?
through.
The click through, Gabriella.
Click through. That's for cultural sensitivity materials, which we happen to have at UCSD. I don't think UC Santa Barbara has it, but say, for instance, users want to access content that has cultural sensitivity, they can click on probably a banner that's on the collection or on the item, and they can be told that the item that they are seeing probably has deceased individuals, which may be a cultural sensitivity issue. And at the same time, we're also allowing the person to make that decision for themselves. For those two, visibilities have been added with two others removed. I believe Surfliner, and I don't remember what the other one was. Surfliner and no, is it private that we got rid of? I'll have to confirm that, but that's the work on the visibility.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Margaret.
And some of that can be traced back to the Hyrax, which is the system that Comet is built on top of, was originally intended to be both patron facing. Really, it was intended to be a patron facing self-deposit system for an institutional repository. And so there's a bunch of visibility of this content to patrons features that are really not relevant for Comet since we're using it in a staff-only context. Do you want to talk about file use, Gabriella, or shall I do that? Might have lost Gabriella. So we've had discussions for going back quite a while about the 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 different ways you can mark a file that's uploaded to Comet for what its intended use is, and you heard David Trujillo mention file sets. So there's a concept in Comet of a file set, which is inside an object you have a bunch of closely related files that you might have the original high resolution scan of a document plus for instance, like a viewing quality lower resolution copy. For audiovisual, you might have, say, you've got an original like uncompressed video, and then you've got compressed viewing quality video, and then you've also got subtitle track or a transcript or something like that. And these things are grouped together in file sets, and each file in a file set is marked with a use, and there's some formal terminology from what's called the Portland Common Data Model that we use to describe these. But we've had a little bit of back and forth both between the two campuses as to what exactly these should mean and how well they align with the original kind of intent of those different uses, and then what the actual expected behavior is in Comet. And if you've been coming to these for a while, you probably heard us talk about some of these discussions in some previous sprint reviews. But I think we have it finally nailed down, and we did a bunch of work this sprint. Particularly, I think Vivian and Longshu did a bunch of work too, and also Matt and Margaret to make sure that the behavior is consistent across all the different parts of the application of which file we're preferring for what and when If a certain file use, if a file with a certain use is present, what do you do? If it's absent, what do you fall back to? And I think it's really great to have all that um, uh, finalized and have it all implemented. So that'll give us much more flexibility going forward. When we don't, for instance, want to depend on Comet necessarily to generate all the derivatives or to generate thumbnails, or if we want to have a little more control uh, over which version of the file is used for what, or which version goes where. Um, we also, now that we've actually had substantial amounts of content loaded into Comet, we started to hit some limits on the performance of some of the screens as we got into tens of thousands of objects. But thanks to, I think, Longshu and some other folks, who else, Michael, was working on the database stuff?
Juliana.
Juliana, of course. Um, uh, they identified and implemented some nice fixes to really make that a lot more performant and let us handle the tens to hundreds of thousands of records that we expect. Um, we also had identified some bugs in a couple of areas. Uh, again, like things that we maybe didn't notice or weren't as obvious when we had smaller amounts of data. Uh, but particularly the workflow task screen, but also some issues with paging through large numbers of objects, and those got dealt with this sprint. So that should make life a lot easier for people that are trying to migrate content and QA migrated content. Um, yeah, I don't know anything about the shoreline stuff. I don't know if it doesn't look like Amy's joined us, or has
Yeah,
Amy joined us?
before we
There you are.
transitioned over to Amy, I wanted to bookmark David. I know we talked a lot about file use. Um, I I think it would be worth highlighting for folks. One of the big reasons we decided to tackle that in this sprint was like removing a lot of potential future work on the cleanup side if things had changed down the line. So not only did it give us a good footing on how we intend to use all those file uses, but that's definitely something that both campuses would have had to consider. So um, thanks again. Thanks for everyone having to do that. A very, very good trade. All right. Amy, do you want to talk to us a little bit about some shoreline?
Yeah, so I think we had really two major things that we focused on for Shoreline this time. One was actually adding an additional field that will allow us to ingest items into Comet. So that would have been a blocker for us to actually ingest any geospatial data into Comet given the field validations. So getting that integrated and implemented allows us to now ingest geospatial data into Comet, and we'll work with that value later on to improve a process in the actual shoreline publishing piece. But at this point, that's a down the road. But just getting that implemented means we can ingest and we don't have a blocker on that. The second piece, well, the second piece was really getting the publishing pipeline working at UC Santa Barbara. It has been working at UC San Diego, but we couldn't figure out why it wasn't working at Santa Barbara, and we were able to resolve that. And so what I'd like to do right now is just take a moment and show sort of what that publication process looks like. And so you can sort of see it, what it looks like from the get-go. So I have a CSV file here, and just to sort of show you what it is, this is aligned with the M3 metadata value. The field that we added in this sprint that's supported in the M3 is this format derivative geo, but that's where now we're able to bring in those files. So I'm going to bring over, and in Comet, let me get a few things out of the way here. I'm going to bring in and create an importer and bring in these shape files. And it's some sort of jurisdictional boundaries for some law-related things that we have acquired from our regional geospatial agency, SANGIST. It's going into the Shoreline project. I find the CSV, I locate it, and we are in law. So let's create and validate. And so this validation is testing all of the fields. and it's a small process, so it should be here. Brought in 8 objects, right? And I can now go back into the validator, continue the process. It will bring in all of the objects into Comet. So just another second. So all objects have been brought in, and I'm going to go look at those now. And so I can see when I brought them in, I actually assigned it as part of a collection. So that import process assigned it to a collection. And I can now view on each of these sort of the metadata fields that were brought in as a part of that CSV, the description. I can see all of these elements. I've got multiple subjects, multiple sort of spatial coverages that were brought in using a pipe. I've got the file itself. And now if I'm ready to go, right, I could do this individually or I could do this as a bulk, but I can go ahead and if I want to publish, for right now, I'm just going to approve it. And this approval process currently mints an arc, and we're in sandbox environment, so it is a sort of temporary arc, but it mints an arc while at the same time it is publishing this object. So if I go look at the public safety jurisdictions for San Diego County in July of 2018, live demo should hopefully work. And we should see, what do we call it? Public safety jurisdictions for San Diego County, July 2018. And so I can view that the geospatial data made it to the map. I can view the metadata that was provided as part of the object into Comet. And so we can see, right, who was providing the Sanjus, all of those metadata fields. And if I want to interact with the map and the content itself, this is actually pulling up the attributes that are associated with this geospatial data file. So I can view sort of the geometry, the extent, and the attributes for a researcher or user who can then assess and determine, is this data right? And then if I want to, I can go and download the file and it will provide me with that original file that I can go. So there it is. So really getting that publishing process unblocked from on the UC Santa Barbara side is huge because now we have both at San Diego and at Santa Barbara. And so we are very excited about the future. So that's all that I have.
That's awesome, Amy. Thanks for walking us through that. I love seeing it all stitched together and working. I think we're definitely past a lot of the demo glitches. I know I'm going to jinx us saying that, but that was awesome to see actually through and through.
And I don't have anything to present. The backend infrastructure side is a little bit less exciting and more of a necessity to just ensure reliability of the services that we provide. So while our current infrastructure has supported various strategies that ensure stability and uptime from like I don't want to say hardware perspective, but I guess just that housing infrastructure side, it was still necessary for us to address resiliency of the data being hosted by that infrastructure. And so the full feature set that we're implementing here at UCSB includes backing up our data and recovering state from any desirable point in time where we know the data was last known to be good, while still minimizing data loss and downtime. So with that, we intend to maintain durability of the service by not taking it down to recover from some unexpected disaster, and also just improve confidence in the service that if we are recovering, it's occurring in a way that's not impacting users who may or may not know that, and what they're doing at any given point might be rolled back and work lost. So yeah, I don't know. Alex, do you have anything else you'd like to add?
I think that's about it. Yeah, we've been kind of exploring different backup and restore strategies that are available for the databases we're using, and trying to make sure that both that we can do it kind of quickly and effectively, um, and also that like we're not kind of over engineering things, and so we're still kind of testing things out and making sure everything happens how we want it, but we're getting a pretty clear idea of um, how it's going to work and how we'll be able to restore in case of disaster in the future.
And if I can just chime in, one of the really exciting things for folks at UCSB about this work, other than, obviously we want to be able to recover our systems if something goes wrong, is that at UCSB we've essentially migrated all of our content that is coming from ADRL into our production system already. That we had because it's migrating, if something went wrong now, we can always just re-ingest it. But we also have begun to migrate content that isn't in ADRL, that isn't publicly available. And so we've started to put that in. We have about 10,000 new objects in the system, but they're sort of stuck at this workflow state where we don't want to mint arcs until we know that if something goes wrong, like we'll be able to recover from that. And so as soon as this work is done, I think we can start approving things in the workflow and minting lots and lots of works for them. So I think that's a really exciting milestone for us since we have so much content that's coming in that's just right now sitting on dark servers. So it's like one step closer to us being able to make that content accessible to patrons, which is really exciting. So thank you for all of the intention and time that both of you are spending on this, because it is a really important piece.
Thanks, team. I think that kind of brings our accomplishment sections to an end. I think we wanted to just kind of underscore sort of our process improvements in this work site, in the sprint again, this was a shorter sprint. This was only 2 weeks, and we managed to get a lot done here. Still balancing that review time. And so that, David M., would you like to maybe add anything just about that balance and just about how that's been working? I know that we're highly intentional, but I'd like if you want to comment in there, let me know.
Well, I think in past sprints we've often had core themes, but we haven't necessarily had enough work on those core themes for everybody to be really participating in moving those sprint goals forward. And we've ended up kind of uh, pulling in things more or less as they seemed easy to do or easy to work on, but not necessarily with as much in attention to priorities and focus. As we get closer to production, I think it gets more critical to well, first of all, like we're getting better about finding ways that everybody can contribute to those goals, but also we really don't want to have somebody implementing a low priority feature in a way that then breaks some critical functionality. We just don't have the runway to fix problems like that we did when going to production was a year away or some indeterminate amount of time away. Now that we're talking about shutting down existing systems on known particular dates and that kind of thing. Uh, we really have to focus, which has been a mental fifth for the team. I think we've been gradually moving in that direction for the last year or so, maybe a little longer, but because this has been under development for a long time without that clear horizon. And now that we have that, it's changing how we work, and I think the team is really stepping up and adapting to that. And it's also meant getting, like Margaret was talking about, getting to cooperate more rather than having everybody going off and doing their own thing. And I think that's great, because that's one of the things that makes this project fun, is that we are collaborating.
Excellent. Thanks, David. It's a perfect bridge to what's next, which is going to be, I think we're looking at finishing up some of the tiny little bit of peer review and QA we have left in Sprint 1, and then rolling right into Sprint 2, which is really, I think, the sneak peek is going to be moving forward on publishing items from Comet to the Discovery prototype, which is going to be pretty cool. All right. I think that concludes our demo for the day. We're going to go ahead and ask if anyone has any questions.